Okay, welcome everybody to video 1. This is just going to be a quick introduction to agility as an area. This shouldn't be new to anybody. We're going to move past this level very quickly, but we'll just make sure that we're all on the same page to get ourselves started out. So the first thing is obviously definitions. When you look at literature or you hear different presentations or you speak to different people, people will cite 5 or 6 different definitions, which are kind of saying the same thing, just in a slightly different way. Okay. I'm not a big one on definitions. It's not something that I care dramatically about exactly which one we use, and I'll explain why within the next few minutes. Okay, but I'll give an overview or a description of really what I think that is the easiest way to think about things are. So you can see here when you look up at this page, obviously we've got these 4 key components, which is outlined in a really traditional paper by Jeremy Shepherd and Warren Young, where ultimately agility needs to satisfy these 4 criteria. Okay, a whole body movement, something that's open, something that's got a cognitive demand, and something that has obviously got some uncertainty. Okay, fits in with our natural understanding of agility is both a physical task linked with a perceptual task. All right, so that's generally what we're going to be using moving forwards. But as I say, I'm far from precious. One of the ways that I try to simplify this in order to remove some of the unnecessary debate between different definitions that can create a little bit of a lack of clarity for people is I really just try to distill things down to what does it mean in the sport. And actually, I describe agility as you can see behind me, a multi-directional and multi-velocity locomotion within a sports-specific task. So it doesn't matter whether it's fencing, whether it's squash, and any other racket sport, whether it's invasion sports. What you're trying to do is you're trying to move in multi-directional planes of motion, you're trying to move with multiple velocities, and you're doing that within a sport-specific situation. And because it's sport-specific, it probably makes it reactive and it probably makes it open and uncertain. But there might be a few examples maybe where it doesn't. Can we still call it agility? Yeah, I think we can. Okay, I don't worry about that too much, as long as the communication between whoever is talking is really clear about what particular task and situation is being discussed. One of the other things which is really important is that we just think about what role does agility have within performance. And I simply describe agility from a performance perspective as the ability to manipulate space in order to create or protect from scoring opportunities. Naturally, if it's an attacking situation, an offensive situation, you're trying to create space in order to score. When it's defensive, you are trying to protect space in order to defend. And usually that's needs a multi-directional movement pattern, and it's normally going to have an element of changes of speed, and the sport-specific component makes it quite reactive and quite uncertain. But it's important as well to think about these are technical tactical demands: create space, protect space in relation to scoring. And when we start talking later about the intersection between the S&C coach's role and the sports coach's role, we will have this divergence, if you like, between these tactical demands or these tactical skills versus some of these more technical physical skills, because ultimately we can create space or protect from space via more global team tactical formations. That's one of the key things that a coach is actually trying to do within a team. I'm thinking field sports here. They are trying to get everybody to work more efficiently together so that they can create scoring opportunities or defend from them. But those opportunities can also be created from an individual's own athletic capabilities. Now, a really fair question is, where does linear speed fit with all of this? We've just mentioned that agility is about creating or protecting space, and that we can do that from both an individual's physical attributes, but that's also what we're trying to do tactically. Now, naturally, moving in a linear motion is where we are most advantageous. We can cover ground the fastest, and it's where an attacking or an opposition player is going to be the most dangerous. Certain sports don't allow you to really do that very much at all. Court sports, for example, which we'll talk about later. But field sports, one of the first things that a defender is going to try and do is going to be remove the linear option. If they remove that linear option, As an attacking player, I then need to think about how do I create space so that I can then get back to a linear option to cover ground really fast. And that then means that those agility skills of creating space or protecting space are going to be really key before we have the opportunity to maximally exploit our linear sprinting capabilities. So actually, when I think about agility, we consider that going as fast as we physically can isn't always going to be the answer. Obviously, more speed, if it doesn't have a negative impact elsewhere, is brilliant. But from an agility perspective, I'm going to start encouraging you to think about, instead of it being, total time in a test as an example, or instead of it just being go faster, 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 consider these things as being the 3 Ds which might contribute towards performance. Okay, those being deception, direction, and displacement. Deception, obviously being about making a move with minimal information given to the opposition. Direction being about the accuracy, so are you picking the right gap and are you making the right angular change? And then displacement, going back to kind of our speed, our ability to move our body from A to B as fast as possible. Different tasks and different situations will need a different amount of each of those things, which is something that I'm going to kind of move on to talk about. So you would have all seen things like this before. Okay, different resources will have slightly different breakdowns of exactly what contributes towards agility. Some much more complicated or much more simplified than others. What you've got behind me that I'll give you a bigger version of that you can zoom into is I've got a relatively complicated one which I'm continually adding to as a constant work in progress. But ultimately, at this point in time, it breaks things down into key sections: physical demands and perceptual demands. And what we have to do is we have to understand that those physical and perceptual demands or skills are very much linked together. Okay, you would have seen in the past this concept of perception and action coupling. We act to perceive, we perceive to act. Okay, what we see changes what we do and vice versa. And we also have this idea of our OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act, this iterative process of taking in information, making decisions which inform our actions, which then changes what information we take in, etc., etc. And we're obviously going to come back to this in much more detail, and we're going to start talking about how these perceptual skills and how these physical skills actually start contributing together. Okay? We'll look at them separately, and we'll also consider how they change and how their importance drives performance when they are naturally merged to work as one. So just coming back to definitions really briefly. You would have seen change of direction speed and this classic differentiation between change of direction speed and agility. Change of direction speed is pre-planned, agility is reactive. Now obviously, because what I've got here are our physical components, change of direction speed doesn't have a reactive component if we think about it in a really traditional sense. But the reason why I show you this is because we're continually seeing new terminology emerge within the literature, emerge within the area, which outlines how we can classify things slightly differently. So change of direction speed, and the way that I'm going to use it throughout this curriculum, relates to more high braking, large angle change movements. Think classic 505 test or 5-10-5, or something where there's a big angular change needing lots of braking strength, lots of deceleration, and then a hard reacceleration. Okay, really extreme change of direction. Maneuverability, which is a term which has more recently come around via Sophia Nymphius, actually refers to more high speed changes in locomotion and maneuverability around small angles. So when I go through different kind of movements and things over the next few weeks, what you'll start to see, okay, these kind of skills we might call maneuverability, and these kind of skills we might call more change of direction speed skills. Which brings us back to putting everything together. And this touches on now a little bit in terms of athlete profiling. So what you can see is we've got this Venn diagram with the intersection between this change of direction speed, maneuverability, and then these perceptual skills or perceptual expertise. If we have an athlete who has lots and lots of physical skills, they can do things both at high speeds, changes in locomotion type, and they can also have hard braking, large angular changes. that we might say they've got all the physical attributes they need from an agility performance perspective, but they lack those perceptual skills. So they are possibly an athlete who is a fast mover, but a slow thinker. And we'll touch on this more within our testing. We have the other option where actually we've got somebody who has got these really high speed changes of direction, where they can brake hard, change at really large angles, and they can also see information really effectively. So they can pick up, they've got good perceptual skills, but they just maybe aren't as adaptable as we want them to be once they get up into the sprinting stride. They don't do cuts and curves particularly well, and in order to come out of the sprinting stride, change their footwork, that's something they maybe don't have the skills of. But if we tested them just in a 5:05 test or just in a 5:10.5, we might say, actually, they come up relatively strong. And naturally, we have our last intersection where we've got the opposite of that, a player who is really fast from a linear perspective and can actually use that linear speed in relatively adaptable ways, and they can pick up information. But when it comes to a really hard braking, large angular change demand, they maybe fall short. And unsurprisingly, our optimal agility performance is going to be right in the center of that diagram. And what you need to do as a practitioner within a different sport is you need to think, what attributes does my athlete need in order to become most effective? Field sports and court sports are very different. So the key thing that I want you to take away from this is that this optimized agility is a combination of lots of different skills, and all of those skills are going to be controlled by different systems. Okay, we'll talk about attributes and testing physical attributes and then assessing the ability to put things together from a skill perspective. But we have got this highly complex interaction between different things to create this big, broad performance outcome. So naturally, what I want you to take from this is not so much these kind of hard definition-based names, is just the fact that agility is highly multifactorial between physical components, which we can break down into different levels, perceptual components, which later I will also break down into different levels. What you need to do is you need to be able to look at your sport, look at the situations that you're trying to transfer to in your sport, and think, what is it that my player and my athlete needs? Classic needs analysis, but with a much deeper look at the task and a much deeper look at movement skills versus just strength levels, power levels, etc., like we might do as an S&C coach. Same thing goes for injury situations, particular injury situations that is either within a sport that you deal with, or when you see people in a clinic and they come to you presenting an injury caused by a certain mechanism which occurred within a certain sport. What were the demands and what were the skills that were needed which they potentially didn't have in that situation is one of the questions that you need to try and ask. So really think about these different components and start thinking critically about how they fit into your particular challenges. And also remember that when we start thinking about this from a performance perspective, a reminder that more and more speed isn't necessarily the answer. It's usually useful, but consider that combination of displacement, direction, and deception. And this is something that we're going to move on to within the first week's worth of content to get you trying to analyze tasks in much more detail. But that's it for now. Hopefully that was useful for everybody for a nice introduction, and we'll really start to get into the details from this point onwards. Enjoy.